They told everyone they were being SA'd by a relative, and literally no one would help them, including the police. And these two children would turn into two of the youngest convicted murderers in history. The sad case of Curtis and Catherine Jones, trigger warning. When I tell you the system failed these two children and all of this could have been prevented, I mean it. So Catherine and Curtis Jones were brother and sister. They were always very close, they took care of each other, and they had went through a lot together. Now on the outside, this family seemed like the perfect family. Beautiful couple, two healthy, beautiful children. But behind closed doors hid a gruesome reality that their parents, Curtis and Stacy, had a very violent relationship, and these children often witnessed their parents fighting. According to their mother, Stacy, the abuse began pretty quickly after she began dating their father, Curtis. Stacy said Curtis often had violent outbursts, which happened when she was pregnant with their first child, Catherine. The physical abuse became so bad that he caused her uterus to tear, and she gave birth to Catherine, who was born prematurely. About a year later, on May 31st, they welcomed their second child, Curtis. And both children would witness their father physically abuse their mother on a regular basis. The abuse became so violent, Stacy packed her things and left home in 1989. She was unable to take her two children, 4-year-old Catherine and 3-year-old Curtis, out of fear that her mother would reject the children because they were biracial. So she really thought she was doing what was best for the kids by leaving them there with their dad. So sometime after their mother left, another family relative on their dad's side moved in with them. And it turns out that relative was a registered schmegs offender. So this relative had been convicted of SAing his ex-girlfriend's 14-year-old daughter before he moved in with them. Not only was he a schmegs offender, but he also had a serious criminal history. Now when the schmegs offender relative moved in, he moved into Curtis's room, and soon after he began SAing Curtis. So sometime later, Catherine and Curtis visit their mother in Kansas, and they tell her about the abuse they've been enduring by that relative. So Curtis told his mother that he was being fondled and SA'd by this older man, and then Catherine admitted she too was being fondled and SA'd by that same relative. So an investigation was started, but it was quickly closed when Curtis changed his story. So in the meantime, Catherine and Curtis both continue to suffer SA and physical abuse with that relative. So the justice records show that 2 years later in 1996, another case regarding the Jones children was opened and an investigation was undertaken concerning Curtis sustaining a bruised and swollen eye. So now we've got the police and CPS in this investigation, and they're still not removing the children from the home. And they still haven't removed the predator from the home. So things would continue in the same abusive manner right on for a few more months. Their mother made numerous reports to CPS, but CPS never properly investigated. And now, September of 1998, a third investigation was opened. This time it was concerning 13-year-old Catherine. Catherine had run away from her home, and her teacher, being worried about her welfare, made the report stating concerns that Catherine was being SA'd. And this time, the police admitted to finding some indicators that Catherine was being SA'd. However, like the ones before, the investigation was short-lived. And get this, Catherine had told her father that this relative was SAing her, and her father took the relative's side. Catherine's father said he did not believe her. He took the side of the relative in question. By the time the investigation began, Curtis Sr. intimidated Catherine into lying to the officials and denying that the abuse had ever happened. So now we know for a fact their father intimidated and threatened Catherine to get her to change her story so the police would back off of this relative. So that tells me he was the reason why Curtis changed his story prior in the first investigation. Remember, we're in the third investigation now. So now, after being intimidated by her father, she was scared that she was going to be separated from her brother, so she changed her story, and now the investigation completely ended. Now, it's reported that the investigators warned their father to kick that schmegs offender out of his house. But of course, their father didn't listen, and he allowed the schmegs offender to continue living with them. So by this point, their father, their family, their friends, CPS, the police department, no one would listen and no one would help them. The only support these children had were each other, and they were both young children. So Catherine was around 12 or 13 years old. The breaking point for Catherine, according to her, was a few days after the last investigation was closed. She was taking a shower when the relative in question came into the bathroom, pulled open the shower curtains, and began pleasuring himself while staring at her. This traumatized Catherine. She huddled in the corner of the bathroom and sobbed until he was done. When he was done, he put 50 cents on top of the toilet and left the room. Catherine then wrote in her diary, "I'm going to unalive everyone." She was angry that her and her brother's cries were going unanswered by her father's girlfriend, the police, and CPS. So Catherine then came to the conclusion that her father, his girlfriend, and their abuser should all be unalived. Catherine eventually told her brother what she was going to do, and they came up with a plan. So to free themselves from torment by unaliving their abuser and eliminating the chance of this ever happening again by unaliving the people they believed allowed the abuse to occur in the first place, on January 6, 1999, they set their plan in motion. Their father left for a little while and their abuser was not home, so they figured they would start off with their father's girlfriend, Nicole. They knew that evening they would be home alone with her and it would be easier unaliving these adults one person at a time. So 29-year-old Sonia Nicole Spikes sat at the dinner table working on a 500-piece jigsaw puzzle while the children went to retrieve their weapon. And that was when they found their father's 9mm semi-automatic pew-pew. Catherine took the first shot, hitting Nicole in her stomach. However, she dropped the pew-pew due to the rebound of the shot. 12-year-old Curtis then picked up the pew-pew and just went crazy. He hit Nicole and everything around her. But as soon as they finished, reality began to set in and they got scared. They realized they had just unalived someone, and that this wasn't some dream or fantasy in their head anymore. This was real. Catherine did her best to calm her brother down, and the pair set to work in an attempt to clean up the scene. They then dragged Nicole's body away from the dining room table and tried to use bleach to clean up the stains. After that, they did their best to try to make it look like someone had broken into the house. So they fled their house, and they stopped by the neighbor's house to let them know the sounds they had heard, the pop-pops, were just an accident. They had accidentally fired a weapon. Then they fled and hid in the woods nearby their home. What's sad is the only time police actually stepped in and really investigated this case is when Nicole's body was found. But if the police had stepped in the first 3 times and helped these children and removed them from the situation, they could have prevented all this. This would have never happened. I think every CPS worker, social worker, and police officer that was involved in this case should have been fired and arrested themselves. They neglected these 2 children so much that they thought they had to unalive someone to get away from this abuse. What were they supposed to do? So the children were found hiding in the nearby woods the next morning on January 7th, 1999. And they were facing serious consequences. They were the youngest people in that area that had ever been charged with murder. The police and the prosecution made them out to be monsters, even though it was the police who had investigated their family 3 separate times and knew about the abuse. Do you think any of those officers or investigators stepped up for them in court? No. Do you think their abuse was ever brought up in court? No. Do you think CPS stepped up on their behalf in court? No. Again, they were failed by the system during their trial. So now in August of 1999, they were 13 and 14 years old, and they were sentenced to 18 years in prison and life on probation. I just can't believe they got 18 years. Especially when people like Alexi Treviso unalived their baby with their own bare hands in a hospital bathroom or walking free today. These were children. They had nowhere else to turn, and that's my opinion. And I am so happy to report that they are both doing extremely well and have been since they were released. Since they got out, they have not been in any trouble at all. But sadly, they lost 18 years of their life, and their dad's girlfriend lost her life because no one would help them. They didn't let prison tear them down and turn them into monsters. There were countless reports made to CPS on behalf of these children, and no one stepped up to protect them. Had someone, anyone, especially CPS and the police department, stepped up and actually protected these kids, none of this would have happened.